The universal translator hummed with its familiar electronic frustration as Dr. Thompson attempted once again to bridge the impossible gap between human language and whatever form of communication Lyra used. 3 months of daily sessions had yielded little more than basic concept exchanges: food, water, safety, danger, while the deeper mysteries of her consciousness remained locked away behind barriers that seemed to mock his expertise in xenolinguistics. The semantic matrices are completely incompatible, Dr. Sarah Chen announced from her position at the monitoring station, her voice carrying the weary tone of someone who had run the same failed experiments too many times. Her neural patterns suggest complex abstract thinking, but we can't access the conceptual framework she's using. Lyra sat motionless in the communication chamber, her luminous silver hair catching the artificial light in ways that seemed to defy physics. Her pointed ears twitched occasionally in response to sounds only she could detect, and her large, dark eyes held an intelligence that was both alien and hauntingly familiar. When she looked directly at Kai, he felt something that the universal translator couldn't process, a sense of connection that bypassed language entirely. Maybe the problem isn't technical, Kai suggested, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his tired eyes. Maybe we're approaching this backwards. How do you mean? Dr. Chen asked, though her attention was already drifting toward the chronometer display. End of shift couldn't come soon enough for most of the research team. We're trying to force her communication into human linguistic structures. But what if her people didn't use language the way we do? What if they had something completely different? Kai gestured toward the chamber where Lyra remained perfectly still, though he could swear she was listening to their conversation with an understanding that shouldn't have been possible. Dr. Marcus Webb, the expedition's chief xenobiologist, looked up from his genetic analysis displays with obvious skepticism. Thompson, we've been over this. Every sentient species we've encountered has some form of structured communication. Grammar, syntax, semantic relationships, they're universal cognitive requirements. Are they? Kai asked. We've met, 6 alien species. That's not exactly a comprehensive sample of universal cognitive requirements. Lyra's head turned slightly toward him, and for a moment, Kai felt something like warm pressure inside his skull. Not painful, but definitely present, as if someone were gently testing the boundaries of his thoughts. She's doing something, he said quietly, not wanting to break whatever connection was forming. Dar. Chen's instruments registered a spike in neural activity from both Kai and Lyra. Telepathic contact attempt, she announced, though her voice carried more resignation than excitement. Same pattern as always. Brief interface, no meaningful data transfer, followed by withdrawal. But this time felt different. Instead of the usual sense of tentative contact followed by frustration, Kai experienced something like a series of emotional impressions, loneliness so profound it made his chest ache, followed by curiosity, then a complex mixture of hope and despair that left him slightly dizzy. Lyra, he said aloud, and her dark eyes fixed on his face with sudden intensity. The emotional transmission shifted, becoming more focused. Now Kai felt something that might have been recognition, mixed with what he could only describe as desperate urgency. She was trying to tell him something, but the concepts were too alien for his mind to process clearly. I'm getting unusual readings, Dr. Chen reported. Her telepathic output has increased by 40%, and Thompson's neural activity is showing patterns I've never seen before. Lyra rose from her chair with fluid grace, moving to the transparent barrier that separated the communication chamber from the observation area. She placed her palm against the surface, and Kai found himself walking over to match her gesture, his hand pressed against the barrier opposite hers. The moment their hands aligned, even separated by the transparent aluminum, the telepathic contact intensified dramatically. Suddenly, Kai wasn't just receiving emotional impressions, he was seeing images, fragments of memory that belonged to someone else entirely. He saw a world of crystalline spires reaching toward twin suns, populated by beings whose silver hair moved like liquid metal in the alien breeze. He felt the warmth of community, the comfort of minds that could touch each other directly, sharing thoughts and emotions as easily as humans shared spoken words. And then came the darkness, the dying star that consumed everything, the desperate evacuation ships, the gradual silence as one by one, the telepathic voices went quiet until only Lyra remained. "My God," Kai whispered, pulling his hand back from the barrier as the intensity of her grief threatened to overwhelm him. "You're not just the last of your species. You're completely alone." Lyra's expression shifted, and even without telepathic contact, Kai could see the surprise in her alien features. She had expected him to understand her loneliness, what she hadn't expected was for him to care about it. "The readings are off the charts," Dr. Chen announced, but her voice seemed to come from very far away. Whatever just happened, it was definitely two-way communication. Dr. Webb approached the barrier with obvious excitement. "Thompson, can you recreate that contact? If we can establish consistent telepathic interface, this could revolutionize our understanding of non-human consciousness." But Lyra was already stepping away from the barrier, her posture shifting from openness to withdrawal. The telepathic pressure in Kai's skull faded, leaving behind an uncomfortable emptiness that he hadn't expected. "I think we pushed too hard," Kai said, watching as Lyra returned to her chair and assumed the neutral position that meant the session was effectively over. "She shared something deeply personal, and we immediately started talking about using it for research." "That's exactly what we should be doing," Dr. Webb protested. "This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for. We need to document every aspect of the contact, run comparative analyses, develop protocols for deeper interface." "No," Lyra said. The word was spoken in perfectly clear, unaccented human standard, and it brought absolute silence to the observation area. In 3 months of daily sessions, Lyra had never spoken a single word of human language. "Did she just," Dr. Chen began. "No," Lyra repeated, this time looking directly at Dr. Webb. "Not research. Not specimen." She struggled with the words, but her meaning was unmistakably clear. "Person." Kai felt his heart skip as the implications hit him. She had been understanding their conversations all along, learning their language while they treated her like an interesting puzzle to be solved rather than a sentient being with her own thoughts and feelings. "Lyra," he said carefully, "how long have you been able to understand us?" She considered the question for a long moment before responding. "Since, 3rd day." "Your words." She paused, searching for the right expression, loud in mind. "Hard to not understand." "You've been listening to us discuss you like a research subject for 3 months, Kai said, guilt washing over him as he realized how their clinical conversations must have sounded to someone who was desperately lonely and hoping for genuine connection. "Yes," Lyra confirmed simply. "You see me as, thing to study. Not person to know." Dr. Webb stepped forward, his excitement overriding his sensitivity to the situation. "But Lyra, this is incredible. Your linguistic acquisition rate, your telepathic abilities, the cross-species communication potential, you could help us understand so much about interspecies contact protocols." Lyra's expression became carefully blank, the way it had been during their first meeting. "You prove point," she said quietly. "Still see research, not person." She rose from her chair again, but this time she moved toward the chamber's exit rather than the observation barrier. "I go now. Tomorrow, transport ship comes. I leave with it." "Wait," Kai called out, but Lyra was already activating the chamber's exit sequence. "Where will you go?" Dr. Chen asked, genuine concern evident in her voice for the first time since Kai had known her. Lyra paused at the threshold, her silver hair shimmering with what might have been unshed tears. "Does not matter. Everywhere is alone for last person." As she left the communication chamber, Kai felt the loss of her telepathic presence like a sudden chill in his mind. Without the warmth of her consciousness touching his, the observation area seemed cold and sterile in a way he'd never noticed before. "We can't let her leave," he said urgently. "She's the only member of her species left alive. The cultural knowledge, the linguistic data, the telepathic research possibilities." "Thompson," Dr. Webb interrupted, "I understand your concern, but we can't force her to stay if she doesn't want to participate in the research program. This isn't about research, Kai realized aloud. This is about the fact that she's been completely isolated for months, surrounded by people who see her as an object of study rather than someone who might need friendship, companionship, understanding. Dr. Chen looked up from her instruments with a puzzled expression. But she is a research subject. That's literally why she's here. She's also a person who just lost her entire civilization and everyone she's ever cared about, Kai pointed out. When was the last time any of us just talked to her? Asked how she was feeling, what she needed, whether she was okay. The silence that followed his question was answer enough. I have to go after her, Kai said, already moving toward the exit. Thompson, the session parameters clearly state, Dr. Webb began. Forget the session parameters, Kai interrupted. I'm going to talk to her as one person to another, not as a researcher to a subject. Maybe if someone finally treats her like she matters for her own sake rather than for what she can teach us, she'll reconsider leaving. As Kai hurried through the station corridors toward the residential section where Lyra had been assigned quarters, he found himself hoping desperately that it wasn't already too late to bridge the gap his own professional detachment had helped create. Kai found Lyra in the station's observation lounge, a transparent dome that offered an unobstructed view of the star field beyond. She sat motionless in one of the viewing chairs, her silver hair creating an ethereal halo in the reflected starlight, while her pointed ears remained perfectly still in a way that suggested deep meditation or profound sadness. The transport arrives in 14 hours, she said without turning around, somehow sensing his presence despite his attempt at quiet approach. You do not need to, how do you say, check on specimen before departure. I'm not here as a researcher, Kai said, moving to sit in the chair beside her. I'm here because I realized we've been terrible to you, and I wanted to apologize. Lyra's head turned slightly, though she didn't look directly at him. Apology for what? You do job. I am job. No, you're not, Kai said firmly. You're a person who's been through something unimaginably traumatic, and instead of offering you comfort or friendship, we've spent 3 months poking at you like you were a fascinating insect. Insect, Lyra repeated thoughtfully. Small thing that flies and makes noise and dies quickly. Yes, good comparison. Kai winced at the casual way she dismissed her own worth. That's not what I meant. I meant we've been treating you as less than a person, and that was wrong. Was not wrong, Lyra said, her voice carrying a terrible certainty. I am last. When I die, my people are gone forever. Until then, I am, living museum. Thing to be studied before it breaks. You're more than that, Kai protested, though he could hear the desperation in his own voice. Am I? Lyra finally turned to face him, and Kai was shocked by the depth of emptiness in her dark eyes. What am I, then? What is person who has no people? What is individual when there is no society to be individual from? Kai found himself speechless, confronted with a philosophical question that had no easy answer. How did you comfort someone who had lost not just everyone they loved, but their entire context for understanding themselves? I don't know, he admitted finally. But I know you're not just a research subject. When you shared those memories with me earlier, your homeworld, your people, what happened to them, that wasn't scientific data. That was personal. Intimate. Important. Lyra's expression softened slightly. You felt it? The connection? Yes, Kai said. And it was beautiful and terrible and completely overwhelming. I can't imagine carrying that much grief alone. Not alone now, Lyra said quietly. Shared with you. First time since. She trailed off, her silver hair shimmering as she shook her head. First time since silence came. Kai felt a flutter of something that might have been hope. Then why are you leaving? If sharing it helped, even a little, why go back to being alone? Because sharing is not same as understanding, Lyra replied. You felt my grief, yes. But you do not understand what it means to be last. You have billions of your people. When you are sad, you know others have felt same sadness. When you are happy, you know others have felt same happiness. You are connected to something larger. She gestured toward the star field beyond the observation dome. I am connected to nothing. My thoughts echo in empty space. My emotions have no reference point. Even my name, Lyra, it means harmony in my language. But harmony requires multiple voices. Single voice cannot make harmony. Kai struggled to find words that could address such profound isolation. Maybe you can't recreate what you had with your own people, but that doesn't mean you have to be completely alone. Humans can learn. We can try to understand. Can you? Lyra asked, and for the first time, Kai heard something like challenge in her voice. Can you really understand what it means to be the only one? To know that when you die, everything your people ever thought or felt or believed dies with you? No, Kai admitted. I can't fully understand that. But I can try to be here with you while you carry it. Lyra studied his face for a long moment, and Kai felt the familiar warm pressure in his mind as she extended a tentative telepathic contact. This time, instead of memories of her lost world, she shared something more immediate, her perception of him, filtered through alien consciousness. Through her telepathic link, Kai saw himself as she saw him, earnest, concerned, genuinely caring, but also fundamentally unable to grasp the scope of her loneliness. Yet mixed with that assessment was something else, gratitude for his attempt, appreciation for his willingness to sit with her in the darkness instead of trying to fix it. You are kind, she said, withdrawing the telepathic contact gently. But kindness does not solve problem of being last. Maybe not, Kai agreed. But maybe it makes being last a little less terrible. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the star field rotate slowly as the station maintained its orbital position. Kai found himself studying Lyra's profile, noting the way the starlight seemed to gather in her silver hair and the delicate architecture of her pointed ears. She was beautiful in a way that was completely alien yet somehow familiar, as if human aesthetic sense could recognize something universal in the arrangement of her features. My people had concept, Lyra said suddenly. Word that does not translate well to human language. Aethys. Closest meaning is, connection that transcends physical existence. Bond between souls that continues even when bodies are separated by death or distance. That sounds beautiful, Kai said. Was foundation of our civilization, Lyra continued. We believed that consciousness could touch consciousness directly, that understanding could flow between minds without need for words. Your people, you build machines to bridge distance between thoughts. We needed no machines. Is that why you're telepathic? All my people were telepathic. But Aethys was more than telepathy. Was recognition that all consciousness is connected at deepest level. That separation is illusion created by physical form. Lyra's voice became wistful. When my people died, I thought Aethys died with them. I thought I would never feel true connection again. Kai sensed he was approaching something important, though he wasn't sure what. But when you touched barrier today, when I shared memories with you, for a moment, I felt something like Aethys. Not same, but similar. Your mind different from my people's minds, but still capable of touching, of understanding. What does that mean? Kai asked gently. Maybe means I am not as alone as I believed, Lyra said, though her voice carried uncertainty. Maybe means your people capable of more than I thought. Maybe means. She paused, struggling with concepts that didn't translate easily. Maybe means Aethys not dead, just different. Kai felt his pulse quicken as he began to understand what she was saying. You're talking about the possibility of real connection. Not just communication, but genuine understanding between human and ethereal consciousness. Yes, Lyra confirmed. But also talking about more than that. About whether last person can find family among different people. About whether belonging is something you are born to, or something you can choose. And what do you think? Kai asked, hardly daring to breathe. Lyra turned to face him fully, her dark eyes reflecting the starlight in patterns that seemed to shift with her emotions. I think I am afraid to hope. Hope is a dangerous thing when you have lost everything. Hope can kill you if it proves false. But hope can also save you if it proves true, Kai pointed out. Yes, Lyra agreed quietly. That is what makes it dangerous. Kai realized they were at a crucial moment, though he wasn't sure how to navigate it without pushing too hard or not pushing hard enough. What would it take for you to stay? Not for research, not as a subject, but as someone who might want to find out whether hope proves true or false. Lyra was quiet for so long that Kai began to wonder if he had overstepped some boundary. When she finally spoke, her words were barely audible. Would take someone to understand that I am not broken thing to be fixed, but person to be known. Would take someone to see that my differences are not flaws to be studied, but gifts to be appreciated. Would take someone to want connection not for what they could learn from it, but for what they could share through it. What if, Kai said carefully, someone wanted all of those things? What if someone was willing to learn your language, understand your concepts, share your experiences not as a researcher but as a friend? As friend? Lyra repeated, and Kai could hear the longing in her voice. As friend, Kai confirmed. As someone who cares about you as a person, not as a subject. Someone who wants to understand Aethys not to write papers about it, but to experience it with you. Lyra's silver hair began to shimmer more brightly, and Kai felt a gentle telepathic touch that carried emotions too complex for words, hope mixed with fear, longing tempered by caution, and beneath it all, a desperate wish to believe that connection was still possible. I do not know human word for what I am feeling, she said finally. What does it feel like? Kai asked. Like maybe I am not last person after all, Lyra replied. Like maybe I am first person of new kind of family. 3 weeks after Lyra's decision to stay, Kai's laboratory had transformed from a sterile research environment into something that resembled a cross between a linguistic workshop and a meditation space. Ethereal symbols floated in holographic displays alongside human phonetic charts, while soft ambient lighting replaced the harsh analytical illumination that had once dominated the room. Your pronunciation is improving, Lyra said, her pointed ears twitching with what Kai had learned to recognize as amusement. Though you still sound like you are trying to speak while chewing rocks. Ethereal vocal structures are completely different from human ones, Kai protested, reviewing the spectral analysis of his latest attempt at her language. My tongue literally cannot make some of these sounds. Cannot make them perfectly, Lyra corrected, floating cross-legged in the air through a combination of her natural grace and the station's carefully modulated artificial gravity. But meaning comes through anyway. Aethys is not about perfect pronunciation. Is about perfect intention. Kai had been studying ethereal linguistic concepts for weeks now, and the deeper he delved, the more he realized that traditional human approaches to language were completely inadequate for understanding how Lyra's people had communicated. Ethereal wasn't just spoken, it was felt, experienced, transmitted through layers of telepathic contact that carried emotional and conceptual information alongside the basic semantic content. Try again, Lyra encouraged, settling back into her chair with the fluid motion that never failed to fascinate him. Remember, you are not just saying word. You are sharing experience of word. Kai took a deep breath and attempted the phrase they'd been working on, Nethys Ethys Kalea, roughly translated as, I understand your heart bond. But where human language would rely on syntax and semantics, Ethereal required him to simultaneously transmit his emotional state, his degree of certainty, and his intention in forming the connection. The telepathic component was the most challenging part. Kai had to learn to lower the mental barriers that humans instinctively maintained, allowing Lyra's consciousness to touch his own while he projected his thoughts toward her. The first few attempts had resulted in uncomfortable mental static, but gradually, he was developing something like telepathic sensitivity. Better, Lyra said, and Kai felt a warm pulse of approval through their nascent mental link. You are beginning to understand that language is not just about words. Is about souls touching. Dr. Chen appeared at the laboratory entrance, her expression carefully neutral in the way that suggested she was trying not to interfere with whatever was happening between Kai and Lyra. Sorry to interrupt, but we've received a priority communication from the Xenological Council. They want a progress report on the communication project. Kai and Lyra exchanged glances. The past few weeks had been blissfully free of official oversight, allowing them to develop their hybrid communication system without the pressure of institutional expectations. But Kai had known that the reprieve wouldn't last forever. What kind of progress report, he asked. Full documentation of linguistic protocols, telepathic interface specifications, and recommendations for broader application to other species contacts, Dr. Chen read from her data pad. They're particularly interested in the potential military applications of telepathic communication. Lyra's silver hair dimmed noticeably, and Kai felt a spike of distress through their mental connection. Military applications, she asked quietly. Standard procedure, Dr. Chen explained apologetically. Any breakthrough in interspecies communication gets evaluated for strategic potential. It doesn't mean they're planning anything aggressive, just comprehensive. But Kai could see the way Lyra's posture had changed, the openness of the past few weeks replaced by the guarded wariness she'd shown during their first encounters. Through their telepathic link, he sensed her thoughts spiraling toward familiar patterns of isolation and mistrust. We could decline to provide military assessments, Kai suggested. Focus the report on cultural and scientific applications instead. That would flag the project for direct council oversight, Dr. Chen warned. Once they decide something has strategic importance, academic freedom goes out the airlock. They'd assign military liaisons, classify the research, probably separate you two to prevent contamination of the data. Lyra stood abruptly, her movement sharp enough to disrupt the room's carefully balanced gravity field. So. I am still research project. Still specimen to be studied and used. That's not, Kai began, but Lyra cut him off with a gesture that somehow conveyed both anger and profound disappointment. Is exactly that, she said, her human speech becoming more fractured as her emotional control wavered. You learn my language not to know me, but to use me. You touch my mind not to understand me, but to understand how to touch other minds. You make me feel less alone so I will be better tool. Lyra, that's not true, Kai protested, rising from his own chair to face her. Everything we've shared, everything we've learned together, that's been real. Personal. Important for its own sake. Has it? Lyra's dark eyes searched his face with an intensity that made him feel transparent. Or has it been, what is word, preparation for real work? Practice before you use techniques on other species. Kai felt the accusation hit him like a physical blow, partly because he could sense the genuine pain behind it, but also because there was a grain of truth in what she was saying. His research instincts had been cataloging their breakthrough methods, analyzing their communication protocols, considering how their techniques might be applied more broadly. Both, he admitted finally, the honesty feeling like a betrayal even as he spoke it. It's been personal and important to me, but I'd also been thinking about how to generalize what we've learned. I thought that was good, that helping other species communicate would honor what you've taught me. Without asking what I wanted, Lyra said, her voice carrying the quiet devastation of someone whose worst fears had been confirmed. Without considering that maybe I do not want my pain, my loneliness, my desperate need for connection to become technique in military handbook. Dr. Chen cleared her throat uncomfortably. I should mention that the Council's timeline is quite aggressive. They want preliminary findings within 48 hours, with full documentation to follow within the week. Lyra's laugh was bitter and completely devoid of humor. 48 hours to reduce my people's most sacred concepts to weapons manual. Very efficient. Kai felt something breaking inside his chest as he watched Lyra's expression close down, the warmth and openness of the past few weeks disappearing behind walls of protection and mistrust. There has to be another way. We could present the research in cultural terms, emphasize the peace-building applications. You still do not understand, Lyra interrupted, her telepathic presence beginning to withdraw from his consciousness in a way that left him feeling suddenly cold and empty. Is not about how you present research. Is about what research is. You take sacred thing, Aethys, connection between souls, and make it into tool for humans to use on other species. But if it helps prevent conflicts, if it makes first contact situations less dangerous. If it gives humans advantage over species they meet, Lyra finished. If it makes humans better at getting what they want from aliens who cannot defend against telepathic manipulation. Kai realized with growing horror that she was right. No matter how benevolent his intentions, no matter how much he genuinely cared about peaceful communication, the techniques they developed would inevitably be weaponized. The Council's interest in military applications wasn't tangential to their research, it was the logical endpoint. So what do we do? He asked helplessly. Lyra moved toward the laboratory's data storage systems, her movements precise and purposeful in a way that made Kai's stomach clench with anticipation of loss. We do nothing. I do something. Lyra, what are you? She activated her administrative access codes, the ones that had been granted to allow her to contribute to their linguistic database. But instead of adding information, she began systematically deleting files, wiping out weeks of carefully documented research with methodical efficiency. Stop! Dr. Chen protested, moving toward the controls. You're destroying irreplaceable data. I am protecting something more irreplaceable, Lyra replied calmly, continuing her deletion process. I am protecting sacred trust that should never have been broken. Kai watched in stunned silence as months of breakthrough research disappeared from the system. The linguistic protocols they developed, the telepathic interface techniques, the hybrid communication methods that had bridged the gap between their species, all of it vanishing into digital oblivion. Lyra, please, he said finally. Don't destroy everything we've built together. There has to be a way to preserve the personal connection while preventing the military exploitation. Lyra paused in her deletion process, her silver hair shimmering with what might have been unshed tears. Is there? Can you promise me that what I shared with you, my loneliness, my need for connection, my people's sacred concepts, can you promise me those things will never be used to hurt someone else? Kai opened his mouth to make that promise, then closed it as he realized he couldn't. Once the research existed, once the techniques were documented and distributed, he would have no control over how they were applied. Someone, somewhere, would find a way to turn telepathic communication into a weapon. I can't promise that, he admitted quietly. Then you understand why I must do this, Lyra said, returning to her systematic destruction of their shared work. But we could keep working together, Kai said desperately. Privately. Just for ourselves. No documentation, no reports, just the connection we've found. Lyra's hands stilled on the controls, and for a moment, Kai thought she might reconsider. But when she looked at him, her expression was heartbreakingly sad. How can I trust that? She asked. How can I be sure that you want connection with me, and not just access to abilities that might be useful later? Because I love you, Kai said, the words escaping before he'd consciously decided to speak them. The silence that followed was complete and devastating. Dr. Chen's eyes widened with shock, while Lyra's expression shifted through surprise, hope, and finally settling on something that looked like compassionate sorrow. Do you? She asked gently. Or do you love what I represent? The breakthrough, the discovery, the chance to be first human to truly communicate with alien consciousness? Kai stared at her, his mind reeling as he tried to separate his genuine feelings for Lyra as a person from his fascination with what she had taught him about communication and consciousness. The two were so intertwined that he couldn't be sure where one ended and the other began. I don't know, he admitted finally, the honesty feeling like stepping off a cliff. I thought I did, but now I don't know. Lyra's smile was heartbreaking in its understanding. That is most honest thing you have said to me. And also why I must finish what I started. She completed the deletion process, erasing the last traces of their research from the station's databases. When it was finished, she turned to face Kai one final time. "Maybe someday you will know answer to your question," she said softly. "Maybe someday you will be sure that you want connection for its own sake, not for what it can teach you. When that day comes, if it comes, I will be waiting." "Where?" Kai asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "Where I was always going to go eventually," Lyra replied. "To find out if last person of one species can become first person of something new." 2 years had passed since Lyra left Meridian Base, and Kai had spent most of that time learning the difference between fascination and love, between intellectual connection and emotional bond. The distinction had proven more painful and more illuminating than he'd ever imagined possible. The communication came through unofficial channels, a coded message that triggered protocols Kai had established across a dozen systems, hoping against hope that someday she might reach out. When the holographic display activated in his new laboratory aboard the research vessel Harmony's Edge, Lyra's image materialized with the silver-haired beauty he remembered, but something fundamental had changed in her bearing. "Hello, Kai," she said, her pronunciation of human speech now flawless despite the vast distances that had separated them. "I hope this message finds you well. I have something important to tell you, but first, I need to know something important about you." The recorded image paused, and Kai realized she was waiting for real-time response despite the communication lag between star systems. Whatever transmission technology she was using operated on principles he didn't recognize. "Lyra," he said aloud, hardly daring to believe she was really there. "Is this live communication?" "Yes," she confirmed, her dark eyes seeming to look directly at him across the impossible distance. "I have learned much in 2 years. About myself, about connection, about difference between loneliness and solitude. But before I share what I have learned, I need to know, have you learned difference between fascination and love?" Kai felt his throat tighten with emotions he'd been carrying for 24 months. "I've learned that I was fascinated by your telepathic abilities, intrigued by your linguistic concepts, and amazed by the breakthrough potential of our communication methods. But I was in love with the way you laughed when I mispronounced ethereal words, the way you floated in zero gravity like you were dancing with the universe, and the way you made me feel less alone in ways that had nothing to do with telepathy." Lyra's expression softened, and for the first time since her image had appeared, she looked genuinely pleased. "That is good answer. More honest than I dared hope for. Where are you?" Kai asked. "The signal trace suggests you're somewhere in the outer rim, but the transmission characteristics don't match any known communication technology." "I am in place that does not exist on any human star chart," Lyra replied. "Hidden colony founded by survivors of various extinct civilizations. We call it Haven, though that is human translation of concept that exists in 17 different languages." Kai leaned forward, his scientific curiosity warring with his personal concern. "Survivors? How many species?" "8 so far, with more arriving each year. Turns out that galactic extinction events are more common than your people realize, and survivors often find each other across vast distances when they stop trying to reconstruct what they lost and start trying to build something new." "That's incredible," Kai breathed. "A multi-species colony of extinction survivors. The cultural exchange possibilities, the linguistic diversity, the—" "Kai," Lyra interrupted gently, and he could hear the echo of their old pattern in her voice. "Sorry," he said, feeling heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm doing it again, aren't I? Thinking like a researcher instead of a friend." "Little bit," Lyra agreed with a smile that took any sting out of the observation. "But also thinking like person who cares about discovery and understanding. That is not bad thing, as long as it comes after thinking like person who cares about people." "I've been trying to learn that balance," Kai admitted. "It's harder than I expected. Most worthwhile things are," Lyra said. "Which brings me to why I am contacting you now, after 2 years of silence." Kai felt his pulse quicken with a mixture of hope and apprehension. "What's happened?" I am pregnant, Lyra said simply, and the words hit Kai like a physical impact. For several seconds, he couldn't process what she'd said. When the meaning finally penetrated, it raised a dozen questions that tumbled over each other in his rush to speak. Pregnant? How? With whom? I thought you were the last of your species. I thought ethereal reproduction required. Kai, Lyra said again, more firmly this time. He stopped talking and took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus on what mattered most. Are you happy about it? Are you healthy? Do you need anything? Lyra's smile became radiant, transforming her entire face with joy. Much better questions. Yes, I am very happy. Yes, I am healthy. And yes, I need something, but not what you might expect. What do you need? I need you to understand that ethereal reproduction is more complex than your biological models predicted. We can reproduce with compatible consciousness, regardless of species, when there is true Aethys, true soul bond, between partners. Kai felt the universe tilt around him as implications cascaded through his mind. Are you saying? I am saying that our daughter will be first truly hybrid child born of human ethereal Aethys, Lyra confirmed. She will carry genetic material from both our species, but more importantly, she will carry consciousness patterns that combine human logical thinking with ethereal telepathic intuition. Our daughter, Kai repeated numbly. But we were never physically. Physical contact was not required, Lyra explained patiently. Aethys operates on level of consciousness connection. When you touched barrier in laboratory, when we shared memories and emotions, when you learned to speak my language with intent rather than just pronunciation, that was conception. Not of body, but of soul bond that transcends physical limitation. Kai sank into his chair as the full weight of what she was telling him settled over him. I'm going to be a father. We're going to have a child together, even though we've been separated by half the galaxy for 2 years. Distance means nothing to Aethys, Lyra said gently. Our connection continued even when we were apart. It grew stronger when you learned difference between fascination and love. It became complete when you chose to pursue understanding for its own sake rather than for what you could gain from it. Is that why you left? Kai asked. To test whether our connection was real? I left because I needed to become a person who could offer genuine partnership rather than desperate need for connection, Lyra corrected. I needed to learn that I was not broken thing seeking repair, but complete person capable of choosing family rather than simply accepting rescue. Kai felt tears gathering in his eyes as he began to understand the journey she'd taken. And now? Now I am ready to be partner, not project. Mother, not specimen. Person who chooses connection because it brings joy, not because it fills emptiness. What does this mean for us? Kai asked. For our daughter. It means that if you want to be father and partner, really want it, not because it represents fascinating opportunity, but because you choose love over discovery, then you have place waiting in haven. We have built something beautiful here, Kai. Something that honors differences instead of erasing them, that celebrates connection instead of exploiting it. Kai looked around his laboratory, at the research projects that had consumed his life for the past 2 years, at the comfortable isolation he'd built around himself while learning to understand his own heart. Then he looked back at Lyra's image, at the woman who had taught him the difference between studying connection and living it. I choose love, he said simply. I choose you, and our daughter, and whatever we can build together. Lyra's joy was so radiant it seemed to illuminate the transmission, her silver hair shimmering with delight. Then come home, Kai. Come meet your family. Home, Kai repeated, testing the word. I like how that sounds. It sounds like harmony, Lyra agreed. Like multiple voices coming together to create something more beautiful than any could achieve alone. As Kai began making preparations to leave everything he'd known for a chance at everything he'd dreamed of, he realized that Lyra had been right about the power of a single word. Aethys had stopped her from leaving 2 years ago, but home was what would bring them together forever. 6 months later, Kai held his daughter for the first time in Haven's gentle artificial gravity, marveling at her perfect blend of human and ethereal features. She had her mother's pointed ears and her father's warm brown eyes, and when she looked at him, he felt the unmistakable touch of consciousness that marked true telepathic ability. "What should we call her?" Lyra asked, floating beside them with the contentment of someone who had found her place in the universe. Kai studied his daughter's face, seeing in her features the bridge between species, the hope for understanding that transcended difference, the living proof that connection was stronger than separation. "Harmony," he said finally. "Her name is Harmony." As if in response, their daughter's mind touched both of theirs simultaneously, sharing wordless emotion that needed no translation: love, belonging, home. The first message from the first child born of true Aethys between species, promising a future where connection would triumph over isolation, where differences would become strengths, and where the word family would mean something new and wonderful. In the end, Kai realized, it hadn't taken chains to bind Lyra to stay. It had taken only the promise of genuine understanding, and the patience to let love grow from fascination into something real, something lasting, something that could create life itself across the vast distances between stars.